for some people,
Yeah.
perhaps we're launching into thinking about racism and dismantling racism, for the first time when it comes to internally within our communities, within our organizations. And other people, you may have been thinking about this for quite a long time. And it's occurred to us that it makes sense to share some assumptions that we are bringing to these forums, because they really do guide what things we talk about and the way that we speak about those things. So one of them is that our UU community is racist and shaped by colonialism, not because we're bad people, but because we have been steeped within a racist and a colonial society. And our UU communities are not immune.
Right. And it is harder to spot racism and colonialism within ourselves and our movement as opposed to outside of it, because we're acclimated to it, and it is still happening.
Yeah, and our UU communities do not yet have the cultural dynamics that support diversity. And we know this because our membership is not very diverse.
And if we want more diversity, we must do things differently. Our culture must shift.
So within that, discomfort is natural as we experience this cultural shift together, and can be evidence of positive growth. So those with relative privilege in any given situation must be aware of this so that we can yield to change instead of resisting that change.
Yeah, and it is our collective tendency to intellectualize and revert to policy and protocol as part of how we have been impacted by colonialism.
And the last kind of assumption that we're bringing to this is that those experiencing marginalization within our community must not be in a position of dealing with the backlash, the caretaking, or the expending the extra energy required to fuel this cultural shift. This work needs to be done by those allies with relative privilege in any given situation.
When I look at these, I read these, I've been reading them all the time because we've been working on these documents for a while now. And I continue to have aha moments. I'm like, oh my goodness, it's so true. And to me, this is a very helpful mirror to be looking into, to say, okay, now, how do I want to change this thing that I'm looking at about myself? And it's good to know that we're all in the room, starting on the same page. I think that it will save us a lot of grief if we're not arguing these points, but asking ourselves in which ways can we see ourselves, and in which ways can we see ourselves in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and expect us to bring our attention back to these realities whenever it is we start going down the garden path of doing any behavior that takes attention away from what we've been asked to do, which is begin to recognize and then dismantle racism.
Mm-hmm.
We can also dismantle other stuff while we're at it, or have that as an equal focus within our communities. But what we're being asked is to dismantle racism and other forms of exclusion. And one of the best ways to do that is to have a handle on what privileges our spaces have and who they favor, right?
Yeah.
And that's what we're
yeah.
In tackling that aspect, we will simultaneously address other forms of inclusion.
Mm-hmm. And again, this is going to come up often, but seeing some of these assumptions may trigger a grief response right away, because we're now is the time that we might be tender enough to see them, and it might be really painful to see that it's not things aren't going to be the same anymore. Yeah.
And on that grief, then to also notice that while we aspire to be radically inclusive in this process, since May till now, and some of the conversations we've had at the grassroots, we've been anything but inclusive. So when somebody says something and we think that it's a less evolved perspective or a less thought through perspective or a less meaningful or compassionate or whatever judgment we put on it. When we approach each other like that, we are causing people and that you know, the nature of our community to feel as though there's a certain level of perfection that needs to happen before you can be included. And what we're saying here is that we want to upfront accept some of these realities, and then when we do our processing, let it be within that.
And that all of this is just helping us be in better relationship with ourselves and one another,
right?
Which is our end goal.
Agreed.